The candles flickered in the darkness when Grandma finally spoke about baby Mary. For 60 years, she had kept a secret so dark she could only speak it in complete darkness. A secret about the night that changed everything. A secret about why she never celebrated Christmas the same way again. What she confessed in that darkened room during the 1987 blackout still makes my hands tremble. The family always thought it was an accident. But Grandma's confession revealed a truth that changed our understanding of guilt, forgiveness, and the weight of secrets that shape entire families. Subscribe to the channel to discover the confessions that only come out in the dark. Because some truths can only be spoken when we can't see the judgment in people's eyes. Tell me, what would you do if someone confessed something that changed everything you thought you knew about your family? December 23rd, 1987. The worst ice storm in 20 years. Power lines lay down across the county like sleeping snakes in the snow. Our entire family gathered at Grandma's house for Christmas Eve preparations. Mom, Dad, my 3 brothers, Uncle Robert, and Aunt Linda with their children. 13 people trapped in a house with no electricity. No heat except the fireplace. No lights except candles and lanterns that danced like ghosts on the walls. At first, it felt like an adventure. We played board games by candlelight, dripping wax like hot tears. We told jokes and shared stories as the wind howled outside. We roasted hot dogs in the fireplace and made s'mores like we were camping. The kids loved it. The adults tried to pretend they weren't worried about the plummeting temperature, the freezing pipes, how long the power might be out. But as the night wore on, the mood shifted like a receding tide. The house grew colder, candles burned lower. Conversations became quieter, more intimate. There's something about darkness that makes people confess things they'd never say in the light. Something about being huddled together that breaks down normal barriers. Something about emergencies that strips away all pretense. Grandma sat eerily still in her rocking chair beside the fireplace. She stared into the flames as if she were seeing something the rest of us couldn't. Something that had been waiting for decades to be revealed. The fire crackled like whispered secrets, and I didn't know I was about to hear the biggest secret of all. Have you ever felt like someone close to you was holding something important back, but were afraid to ask what? We began sharing memories to pass the time. Funny childhood stories that glowed like candles. Embarrassing school moments that now seemed precious. First dates and wedding days that warmed our hearts more than a fireplace. The usual family folklore that is passed down through generations, like old recipes written on yellowed paper. Uncle Robert told the story of the time he and Dad got lost in the woods, how they walked in circles for hours before realizing they were only 50 meters from home. Dad shared the tale of his first job interview, how he showed up wearing one brown shoe and one black shoe. He was hired anyway because the boss was impressed by his honesty about the mistake. The children begged for stories about the old days, before television, before computers, when Grandma was young. But Grandma was unusually silent, rocking slowly in her chair as if cradling painful memories. "Tell us about when you were little, Grandma," my younger cousin begged. "Tell us about Christmas when you were our age." Grandma's hands tightened on the arms of the chair, like claws grasping for life. "Christmas was different then," she said softly. "Very different. Not always happy, not always safe." The fire crackled as if in comment, sending sparks upward like dying stars. "What do you mean, not safe?" Mom asked, concern tinging her voice. "Grandma, you never told us about difficult Christmases. You always said your childhood was happy." full of love and tradition. Grandma rocked slowly in her chair. The firelight cast shadows across her face, making her look older than her 78 years, more fragile, more burdened. "There are some stories that shouldn't be told in the light," she whispered like wind through dry leaves. "Some truths that can only be spoken in the dark, when you can't see faces, when you can't read judgment in people's eyes." Have you ever had to choose between keeping a painful secret or risking changing how people see you? The room fell completely silent, like an empty church. Even the children sensed something serious was happening, something that demanded their attention, their respect. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire, the whistling of the wind through the eaves, the comfort of an old house holding too many people, too many secrets. "Grandma," Dad said gently, "you don't have to tell us anything you don't feel comfortable sharing. We're just passing the time until the power comes back on." But Grandma shook her head, as if balancing 60 years of solitude. "Maybe it's time," she said. "Maybe I've carried this alone long enough. Maybe the darkness is a sign that it's safe to speak." She adjusted her shawl around her shoulders, as if preparing for a long journey back into the past. "I was 12, Grandma began, her voice cracking like old wood. "December 1927. It was the coldest winter anyone could remember. We lived in a 2-room cabin then. Me, my parents, and baby Mary, my little sister. Only 8 months old. The sweetest baby you ever saw. Always smiling, always happy. I'd heard about Great Aunt Mary before, the baby who died young, before modern medicine could save sick children. It was a sad story, but not uncommon for that time. Many families lost babies to disease. It was an accepted tragedy of the times. On Christmas Eve morning, Mary woke up with a fever," Grandma continued, each word seeming to be pulled from some deep, dark place. "Mother sent me to get the doctor. But the roads were impassable. Snowdrifts higher than my head. I couldn't get through. I couldn't get help. I had to turn back." His voice was getting smaller, more strained, like the words were being dragged out from somewhere that had been sealed for decades. "When I got home, Mary was worse, burning with fever, crying so heartbreakingly. Mom was frantic. Dad was chopping wood for the fire, trying to keep the cabin warm. And She stopped. She stared into the fire as if reading her future in the flames. The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd changed her mind. She'd decided not to finish the story that had begun to unravel like a ball of pain. Have you ever started to tell something and realized that the words carried more weight than you expected? "I was supposed to watch Mary while Mom made broth," Grandma whispered like a confession in a confessional. Dad was still outside with the wood. Mom was in the kitchen area, only 10 feet away, but with her back turned. Mary was in her crib by the fire, crying and crying. That terrible, sick cry that makes you desperate to help. I had read it in one of Dad's medical books about bringing down fevers, cold compresses, cold baths. I thought I was helping. I thought I was being responsible, the responsible older sister. She stopped again. This time her hands were shaking like leaves in a storm. "Grandma, you don't have to go on," Mom said softly. "It's okay." But Grandma held up her hand as if stopping time. "No, I need to say this. I've needed to say this for 60 years. The flames in the fireplace seemed to lean forward, as if they too were listening, waiting, witnessing. I took Mary outside, in the snow, just for a minute. I thought the cold air would bring down her fever. I'd read that somewhere, or thought I had, or wanted to believe I had. I was 12 and desperate and scared. The room was dead silent. Everyone understood where this story was going. Everyone hoped they were wrong, but knowing deep down they weren't. It was so cold, Grandma continued, tears shining like diamonds in the firelight, colder than anything you can imagine. Mary stopped crying immediately. I thought it was working. I thought I was helping her. But then she went limp, so still and silent. Too still, too silent. I ran inside screaming. Mommy took one look at Mary and knew. Daddy came running in from outside. They tried everything, warming her by the fire, breathing into her little lungs. But it was too late. She's gone, and it was my fault. The silence that followed was like the weight of the world resting on our shoulders, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Have you ever carried guilt so heavy that it seemed impossible to share with anyone? Grandma, no, Dad said firmly, breaking the silence like an axe breaking ice. You were a child. You were trying to help. It was an accident. A terrible accident, but not your fault. That's what they told me. She nodded like a porcelain doll. What everyone said, it wasn't your fault, Helen. You were just trying to help. Sometimes babies die and there's nothing anyone can do. But I knew the truth. Mary died because of what I did, because of my ignorance, my desperation, my terrible, fatal mistake. That's why I never celebrated Christmas the same way again, she continued, her voice heavy with the weight of 6 decades. Oh, I pretended. I decorated trees, cooked dinners, gave gifts, but there was always a shadow, always an empty place at the table, always the memory of that Christmas Eve when everything changed, when I learned that good intentions can have terrible consequences, when I learned that love sometimes kills what it's trying to save. I thought about every Christmas I spent at Grandma's house, how she always seemed a little sad during the celebrations, how I sometimes looked at the Christmas tree with tears in my eyes, how I would always set an extra place at dinner for unexpected guests, she would say. But now I understood. It was for Mary, for the sister who never got to grow up, for the baby who died because a scared 12-year-old girl made a desperate choice. Have you told anyone? Uncle Robert asked gently. Have you talked to a pastor or counselor? Have you tried working through the guilt? Grandma shook her head like someone carrying a heavy cross. Who would understand? Who would believe it was really an accident? Who would forgive what can't be forgiven? I killed my little sister. That's not something you get over. That's not something you leave behind. That's something you carry until you die. But you didn't kill her, Aunt Linda said softly, like a spring breeze. You tried to save her. You did what you thought was right with the knowledge you had. You were a child dealing with an adult crisis. You were brave enough to try when everyone else was helpless. It doesn't change the outcome, Grandma replied. It doesn't bring Mary back. It doesn't erase 60 years of wondering what would have happened if I had just left her in the crib, if I had just waited for the fever to break naturally, if I had been smarter, wiser, less impulsive. For the next 2 hours, we spoke in the darkness, about guilt and forgiveness, about childhood trauma and lifelong consequences, about the weight of secrets and the relief of confession. Have you ever noticed that sometimes the most painful stories carry the most important lessons? Just before dawn, the lights flickered back on, the heater hummed to life, the refrigerator began its familiar hum. The normal sounds of modern life returned like an orchestra tuning up. But something had changed in that house during those dark hours. Something had changed in our family during that long night of confession. We had entered the blackout as people who thought we knew each other. We emerged as people who truly knew each other. Grandma was no longer the perfect matriarch we had idealized. She was a real person with real pain and real mistakes. And somehow, that made her love for us even more precious, even more powerful, because we understood what it had cost her. As we prepared to leave that morning, Grandma pulled me aside. "I want you to remember something," she said. "The things we tell each other in the dark aren't meant to stay in the dark forever. They're meant to help us better understand the light, to appreciate normal days, to value imperfect families, to forgive ourselves and others." What she told me that night wasn't just about Mary. It was about all of us, about how we carry each other's burdens, about how love survives even our worst mistakes. If this story made you think about the secrets your own family may be carrying, you're not alone. Sometimes the heaviest burdens become the foundation for the strongest love. Subscribe to Grandma's Diaries for more stories that prove healing happens when we're brave enough to speak our truth. And come back next week for the story of the woman who planted flowers on the same grave for 40 years, until we discovered the grave was empty and always had been. Trust me, what she was really doing there will restore your faith in the power of love that transcends understanding. What would you do if you discovered that someone you loved had been carrying a heavy burden alone for decades?